He is the only president to have sat in State House on 2 different tenures, first in the 60s just after independence and then from 1981 to 85 after Idi Amin. It was also to Milton Obote that the very symbolically important national flag was handed at Independence Day on October 9, 1962. On the other hand, Obote is held responsible for much of the political and military turmoil, which characterized Uganda in the early years after independence. Milton Obote was born in a small village, called Akoroko, in 1925 to Stanley Obote, a village chief, and Puliska Obote, who was a simple housewife. Milton Obote was the third child out of 11 children. For primary education, he went to Abuja Primary School in Lira and later moved to Jinjia and joined the famous Busoga College, Mwiri, for his higher education. He later qualified to join Makerere College, now Makerere University, to study economics. However, Milton Obote did not finish his education at Makerere University, and there are conflicting reports about why he left Makerere without completing his degree. He claimed that he did so because he was being forced to study what he was not comfortable with. He explained that his major goal was to study law and not economics. Another report, however, indicates that he was expelled from the university after leading a strike. On leaving Makerere, he tried to go for various scholarships in both the US and the UK, but his moves were thwarted by the British. While still a student, the young Obote had already distinguished himself as a leader. Throughout Lango and many parts of the north, he mobilized the masses for both work and political self-determination. With no educational qualifications and hence jobless, Obote decided to work as a casual laborer for Molum, a famous construction firm at the time. For some reason, he was transferred to Kenya, and it is here that his political dynamism came to the fore. He soon joined Kenya's agitation for political independence, and his political party of choice was the Kenya African Union. Along his employers, Obote continued shining, and soon, he was removed from being a mere casual laborer to an office worker. He grew in stature as a trade unionist in Kenya, advocating for workers' rights and at the same time propagating self-determination for Kenya. It was then that the British colonialists took notice of him. Obote returned to Uganda in 1975 when the country was agitating for independence. He had already heard about the political parties leading the fight in Uganda, and he made his choice. Among the parties of the time included the Uganda National Congress, UNC, of Ignatius Kangave Muzazi, the Democratic Party, DP, of Bendicto Kiwanuka, among others. He chose the UNC and soon rose to the level of deputy chairman of the party. For coming late, when the independence agitation had started way back, Obote was in some circles called a latecomer who ate the juicy piece. He also came back at a time when the independence discussions between Ugandan agitators and the British were set to kick off under the Legislative Council, LETCO. Obote was nominated as a member of the LETCO by the Lango District Council in 1958. By 1960, Obote had disorganized Muzazi and Kiwanuka out of the UNC and became its president. However, seeing no future with the UNC, he formed his own political party, the Uganda People's Congress, UPC. In 1962, after losing to DP in the earlier elections, Obote jumped into an alliance with Kabaka Yeka, KY, a party that was largely advocating for Buganda's rights. The alliance then won the independence elections, which warranted them to form the first independence government. Subsequently, Obote became the executive prime minister of Uganda, while Sir Edward Mutesa became the ceremonial president of Uganda. By 1964, the alliance between UPC and KY had started to crack over different factors, and by 1966, Obote ordered his then army commander Colonel Idi Amin to attack the Liberai, resulting into the desecration of the kingdom. The Baganda were angry with Obote for destroying their kingdom. On his part, however, Obote claimed that he did so because he wanted to maintain Uganda as a nation. But it is largely because of this fallout that, according to political observers, Uganda set on the road to the carnage and turbulence that characterized the 70s and 80s. In 1967, Obote promulgated a new constitution that replaced the 1962 Independence Constitution and declared Uganda a republic. Obote then became the President of Uganda. By 1969, he had fallen out with more of his party members. They argued that he was becoming more autocratic and was no longer listening to them. He also got the idea of nationalizing all businesses in the country and was looking at more support from the East than Uganda's traditional allies, the West. In 1969, there was an attempted assassination at him at Lugago. This was a harbinger of things to come. But it was also around this time that he implemented some of the most notable development projects in the country, when his government constructed 22 big hospitals and at least 30 big secondary schools across the country. By 1970, the British and Israelis that had supported Uganda for much longer had completely fallen out with him. A plot to get rid of him was then hatched. Surprisingly, the person that the coup plotters chose to replace him was none other than Idi Amin, his long-standing ally. On January 25, 1971, while Obote was attending a Commonwealth conference in Singapore, he was overthrown by Idi Amin. Obote ended up in Tanzania as a refugee. However, he soon started organizing fighters to come back and overthrow Idi Amin. In 1971, he tried to organize a force to attack Uganda from the Sudan. In September 1972, an attack organized by him and other exiles like Yoweri Museveni finally took place. It was however a fiasco as Amin's forces defeated the attackers and chased them back to Tanzania. But Obote's friendship with Nyerere meant that he stayed in Tanzania and continued organizing. When Amin attacked Tanzania in 1978, Obote and his fighters on one part, then other groups like Freneza supported by the Tanzanian government counter-attacked and on April 11, 1979, overthrew Amin. Because of the animosity that Obote had generated in his first term, many neutrals did not want him to return as President of Uganda. This is why Yusuf Lul was named president, followed by Godfrey Binaza, then Paulo Muwanga before elections were held. It was only through elections that Obote found a clear way of returning as president. In an election organized by his cohorts like Paulo Muwanga and with the army headed by David Oyot Ajak totally behind him, Obote returned and took part in the elections that were so bungled up and rigged that he had to win them. Obote's second term was nothing but bloody. In February 1981, a rebel group, the National Resistance Army, NRA, led by Yoweri Museveni launched a people's protracted war in Luwero. There was also a rebellion in West Nile by Amin's remnants and another by Andrew Kayira's Uganda Freedom Movement, UFM. It was Obote's reaction to the attacks by these groups that however made him more unpopular. This is because his soldiers tried to defeat the rebellion by killing innocent civilians within and outside the operational areas. Besides, rising casualties amongst his soldiers, but especially the Akoli created divisions within the ranks of the army. The death of Major General David Oyot Ajak, Obote's main arm in the country, aggravated the divisions within the army, after Obote appointed a less experienced Brigadier Smith Banakok, instead of one of the top Akoli officers, Brigadier Basilio Okolo. On July 27, 1985, Obote was again overthrown by the army. He fled to Zambia and remained there until his death in 2005. Milton Obote was born on December 28, 1925 in a village called Akoroko. His father, Stanley Obote, was a village chief and his mother Puliska Obote, a housewife. Milton Obote was the third born out of the 9 children. Milton Obote was the second president of Uganda. He became president of Uganda on April 15, 1966 to January 25, 1971 and on December 17, 1980 to July 27, 1985. He is the only president to have sat in State House on 2 different tenures. His biggest achievement was leading Uganda to independence in 1962 from British colonial administration. It was also to Milton Obote that the very symbolically national flag was handed at Independence Day on October 9, 1962. Tailing the nation's independence, he served as Prime Minister of Uganda from 1962 to 1966. He also enforced some of the most notable development projects in the country during his term. His government constructed 22 big hospitals and at least 30 big secondary schools across the country. Milton Obote's shortcomings were noticeable. He was held responsible for much of the political and military turmoil, which characterized Uganda in the early years after independence. By 1969, he had fallen out with more of his party members. They argued that he was becoming more autocratic and was no longer listening to them. He also got the idea of nationalizing all businesses in the country and was looking at more support from the East than Uganda's traditional allies, the West. During his regime, flagrant and widespread corruption emerged in the name of socialism. Food shortages elevated the prices, and also his persecution of the Indian traders contributed to this rise. Obote's regime terrorized, harassed, and tortured people. His secret police, the General Service Unit, led by Obote's cousin, was responsible for many cruelties. In 1969, there was an attempt on Obote's life. After the attempt, all opposition political parties were banned, leaving Obote as an independent ruler. By 1970, the British and Israelis that had supported Uganda for much longer had completely fallen out with him. A plot to get rid of him was then hatched. Surprisingly, the person that the coup plotters chose to replace him was none other than Idi Amin, his long-standing ally. In 1971, while Obote was attending a Commonwealth conference in Singapore, he was overthrown by Idi Amin. In 1979, Idi Amin was ousted by Tanzanian forces assisted by Ugandan exiles. The elections in 1980 were won by Uganda's People Congress, UPC, party. However, the UPC's opposition believed that the elections were rigged. This led to the guerrilla war by Yoweri Museveni's National Resistance Army, NRA, and many others. His second period of rule was damaged by repression and the deaths of many civilians as a result of a civil war. On July 1985, Obote was overthrown again by his own army commanders in a military coup. The commanders were Brigadier Basilio Olera Okolo and General Tito Okolo. After his second removal from power, Obote fled to Kenya and later to Zambia. Rumor had it that he would return to Ugandan politics, although he announced his intention to step down as a leader of the UPC. On October 10, 2005, Obote died of kidney failure in a hospital in Johannesburg, South Africa. Milton was survived by his wife Mwiri Obote and 5 children. Obote was born the third of 9 children in a farming family in north-central Uganda. He first attended Busoga College in Mwiri and then Makerere College in Kampala from 1948 to 1949, but he was expelled from the latter for his political activities before he could graduate. The British colonial government prevented him from accepting scholarships to study in the United States and West Germany, and in 1950 Obote went to Kenya. There, while working as a laborer, clerk, and salesman, he became involved in the independence movement and joined the Kenya African Union. Obote returned to Uganda in 1957 and became a member of the Uganda National Congress Party. In 1958 he was elected to represent his home district in the Legislative Council, where, despite the fact that he was one of a small number of African delegates, he did not hesitate to criticize the British government. When the National Congress Party split, he formed the Uganda People's Congress, UPC, which drew its support mainly from the northern Akoli and Lango peoples. The UPC's main political focus was opposition to the powerful southern kingdom of Buganda under King Mutsa II. Having become prime minister in 1962, Obote accepted a constitution that granted federal status within Uganda to 5 traditional kingdoms, including Buganda. He was thus able to form a governing coalition made up of his UPC and Buganda's Kabaka Yeka, King Alone, party. In 1963 Mutsa was elected to the, largely ceremonial, post of president with Obote's encouragement. In 1966, however, the conflict between Obote and Buganda reached a head. Obote sent troops led by Idi Amin, an officer from a northern district, to attack Mutsa's palace, and Mutsa fled to Great Britain. In an effort to solidify his rule, Obote introduced a new constitution that abolished all the kingdoms and other remnants of federalism in the country. The new constitution also established an executive presidency, which Obote assumed while continuing to serve as prime minister. But Obote's increasing reliance on the military and police to terrorize his political opponents aroused the resentment of southern Ugandans, and it allowed Amin to build a following based on recruits from among his own Kakwe people. Early in 1971 Obote was overthrown in a coup led by Amin. Obote settled in neighboring Tanzania, where he maintained a small émigré army under the generalship of Tito Okello, an Akoli. This army aided Tanzanian forces in deposing Amin in 1979, and Okello was able to secure Obote's election to the presidency after Obote's return from exile in May 1980. As president, Obote solicited foreign aid in an attempt to raise Uganda's economy from the ruin of the Amin years, but he did nothing to prevent Akoli and Lango soldiers from conducting a campaign of murder and pillage in the south and in Amin's home district. In 1985 Obote was forced out of office by Okello. He eventually settled in Zambia but continued to play an active role in the UPC until his death in 2005. Thank you for watching this video.